Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaRavelis and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link down in the description to the page, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. My name is Joshua Ravelis. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down with fellow enthusiasts to talk about what's going on in the technology, business, and gaming world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Ravelis. I'm your host as usual. And, well, clearly besides today being another episode, and obviously the first time we're uploading during the weekend, but obviously we're testing out something a little bit new with the show. So this is the first time I'm actually using an XLR setup with my friend, which I'll get to introducing him in a bit. That obviously the audio is going to sound a little bit different in comparison because, you know, we're using a little bit of a setup and different microphones. But yeah, so getting back to introducing my friend. So for today's episode, I got my friend Ryan here on the show.
Hello.
So yeah, just to give a little background before I let him introduce himself properly. So Ryan's one of the guys that I met during my time in high school, and he's currently a junior in Woodrow, basically the high school I was at. And so, yeah, I'm going to let him introduce himself a lot better so he can give a more proper introduction.
Oh boy, okay. I'm Ryan. I'm the person that kind of helps set up the mics here. And I'm here because this is the Oneplus episode. So
yep.
We're going to have some fun with that.
Definitely a little bit more fun with this one. So, I don't know, because I did this with Garrett, so I'm going to ask you, like, you know, what kind of are you looking at, especially career-wise, in your own opinion?
Career-wise? For the time being, at least, I'm looking more into acoustic engineering, which is really an interesting topic.
So, clearly a lot different. Well, obviously, I know you do computer science as well because, you know, you were in robotics and everything, and that's how we met, and band, besides band as well. So, that, obviously, in my opinion, one of the more... If you want my own personal opinion about it, like, yeah, Ryan's one of the guys that I consider very musically gifted and everything, and the kid's obviously phenomenal at what he does, especially given that the whole episode I did talking about my experience being a musician and everything in band. Obviously, I consider him one of the more better players, clearly, compared to me. I've always, probably a mid-card player at best, but I know he's definitely a lot better than I am, and I know, well, he's right here in front of me, and he knows that I feel that way about him. But, yeah, so today's episode, we're going to be talking about Oneplus, and I know what you guys are thinking. You're probably thinking, "What the heck is Oneplus?" or what is it specifically? I think that's what we're probably wondering. So, Oneplus is a Chinese company. I know what you guys are already thinking when I say Chinese. Yes, they are a Chinese phone manufacturer, and it's really interesting in this case because Oneplus wasn't really a well-known brand. I consider them more of an enthusiastic brand, like the same way I treat the Pixel phones, is I treat the Pixel phones as enthusiastic phones. They're meant for enthusiasts, not for, well, consumers as well, but they're mainly used by enthusiasts because of the cameras and everything and how they advertise themselves. But OnePlus always advertised themselves as I'd say as a cheaper, affordable option because they are positioning themselves as a flagship, even though it's not really at flagship prices, especially given today's date and the day we live in. You know, flagship phones are usually about $1,000 and OnePlus's phones are usually around $500. Obviously it wasn't always that way, but we'll get to that. So, you know, talking about it, I think specifically what we need to focus on is probably our experience with it, because I think Ryan overall has a more better experience with the phone specifically than I do, especially because I've only owned one OnePlus phone, and that was only the OnePlus 6, and I only had that for a little bit of time, and that was mainly because I had to sell it. Yeah, very unfortunate. I really liked it. I had to sell it because of some stuff for college, but, you know, I'll let Ryan talk about his experience with the phone, and then I'll go into mine, since mine's not as pronounced as his.
All right, well, my current phone and long-standing phone has been the OnePlus 3T. Yeah, they have some weird numbering systems for their OnePlus phones, but it's the OnePlus 3T. It's the third generation, and it's the T model, which makes it with like a better battery capacity and a better camera, which is a big plus for me personally. But basically, I mean, it's really, really, really nice, actually. They have their own OS based off of the Android, the standard Android operating system called Oxygen OS, and that's a very, very sleek and clean and utilitarian. At least that's what my experience has been about. It's kind of got everything you need. They have stuff like they don't have a lot of proprietary stuff. So like I have their wireless earbuds as well. Those work over Bluetooth, so it works with any phone you want. But yeah, it's in my opinion, it's a very, very good phone. My phone I've had for I want to say 2 or 3 years.
You
now.
pretty much had it since your freshman year.
I have. So yeah, so about 3 years I've been running with a OnePlus 3T, and it's not playing that Apple shenanigans where it slowly slows down. It's clean. For those of you enthusiasts out here, for the tech specs, the OnePlus 3T has 6 gigs of RAM, which is ridiculous, I know, but
trust me, they're getting more at this point.
Yeah,
we're already at 12 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, it's crazy. They have a 24 megapixel on the back and a 16 on the front. It's got a proximity sensor. It's got a little LED. My personal favorite is the little slider, the alert switch slider for on and off.
I love that
for
thing
ringer.
so much.
So it's a 3-way slider, so you can set it to ring, you can set it to do not disturb, and you can set it to silence with just vibrations only, with just a little switch on the side, which is really kind of it's fun to mess with pretty much.
I find it ironic too because I'm I take a little bit of credit for it, but I'm kind of the one that recommended the phone to him because he was Ryan. You had a 5S before, or
I had a 5C, I think is what it was.
Yeah, it was a 5C. And I was actually the one that recommended it because, I was also at that time, wanting to switch back to Android. And I was like, this is a phone that at the time, this is when I was learning more about the tech industry and everything, that, I saw it as a good way. Obviously, I'm not going to say I use them as a test subject because that'd be pretty messed up to say that. But, I thought it'd be an overall good phone for him, given that he's very tech savvy and he would be very good with it. And overall, he's made it last longer than most phones I've ever made in my life have. So that's why I said it's very interesting because with OnePlus, it's kind of interesting to me, and their approach to specs and everything is that they're very, very spec heavy for the price, especially because at the 3T when it came out, I think it was around 300, 400. They were barely pushing into the 400.
It was like
range.
420 or something like
that.
Yeah,
they were barely pushing into the 400 range, and that's already saying a lot because by that time, flagship phones were not even close to 1,000, but we were already pushing there, especially just to get more storage. And I think for the 3T at the time, especially because they increased the battery life and the T was for turbo, which a lot of people were using the slogan that the T is basically the T is the new S, but instead the T actually meant something. And in comparison, I agree with them that for me the T series are always the ones that you should wait for every year, especially because they always make 2 models. There's always the regular one, and then there's the T version. The T version always comes out near the end of the year, but that's always with more upgraded specs than usually.
There's like a 6-month difference between when they release the standard variants and then the T variants.
Yeah, so they basically do it there's 2 phones every year. So I'd say quarter, either if you split the year into quarters, probably early quarter 2 is when they release the actual first version of it, and then the quarter 3 or 4, or quarter 3 is when the new version comes out. And it's very interesting because the T, specifically using the OnePlus 6, which is the one that I had, I really like the OnePlus 6. Obviously, yes, I believe the design, I liked its design, everything, and what they were going for, and the colors were incredible with creamy white and things like that. And obviously the red was, in my opinion, is better than the Project Reds I've seen on the iPhones, and I personally love those colors. But specifically with the 6 obviously compared to the 6T, yes, there were upgrades, especially in terms of battery life, because the 6T had the biggest battery in the OnePlus phones, which was 3,800 milliamp hours, which is really big for the phones because naturally those phones don't have that much battery because they're already running clean software, and they already last a good amount because they use a fully clocked or even overclocked version of the Snapdragon cores that come out during that year. So that's why in performance wise they don't lag at all compared to, I'd say Samsung's the only reason Samsung's lag a little bit, but they don't lag anymore, is just because of the Bixby and all that stuff, because I think Bixby is just stupid. I like that OnePlus hasn't made their own assistant, and they just fully embrace Google Assistant and actually allow you to integrate in interesting ways. And really, especially in my case, that I use a Google Pixel, which the Pixel, in my opinion, is the flagship version of the OnePlus phones. But I still love the OnePlus brand as a whole. due to the fact that their whole mission statement of never settling. And, you know, that's always been their slogan ever since, is because they don't believe in settling. Even though, yes, there are some areas that I have to agree that they do cut corners at times. Yes, like the phones are very good and performance heavy, but obviously when they came out, they weren't the nicest looking phones. They looked pretty bad, like what people would consider Android phones at the time. Because obviously the stigma was Android phones can never look as good as iPhones, which as time went by, Android phones ended up looking better than iPhones, and iPhones ended up, you know, having to catch up.
iPhones look pretty sexy.
They do. I'm not gonna lie. They're always, especially the newer ones, bro. They're amazing. But Android's caught up, and obviously, yes, in cameras, that's another place where the OnePluses fall short at times, just because the cameras aren't as good as the flagship phones. I specifically refer to Marquez's video where he talked about, you know, where he kept switching back and forth between the Pixel and the OnePlus, where his main thing was always the camera. And, you know, since he's a camera guy, he has lots of cameras. Marquez, well, basically works with 8K cameras, so he knows what what good cameras look like. So obviously, yeah, I get why he had that opinion about it. And obviously, yeah, you know, that was kind of the dilemma with me, is, you know, I like the performance and everything of my OnePlus 6, but, you know, besides the financial situations and paying for some books for college, I had to sell it, and, well, something else happened in the process, but the whole point was to sell it to get books for college. But I overall liked the experience, but the thing is, obviously, I just had to sell it because of some financial needs, and at the same time, like, I just couldn't let go of the camera on my Pixel. Obviously, yes, OnePlus is, compared to many of the manufacturers of Android, they are the closest thing to Google and their Pixel software, clearly, because it's clean. Even though Oxygen OS clearly improves on all the Android updates in their own unique ways, and that's what makes them last really long. And since they are part of Google's software program, now they're getting the updates a lot quicker compared to many of them. So they're obviously getting it quicker than, yeah, they're actually getting quicker than Samsung at this point, which, you know, that's kind of saying a lot, given that Samsung is one of the bigger players in the smartphone market all over the world. And that kind of leads into the next point, where we're talking about the company's growth. So OnePlus was originally founded in 2013, if I'm correct, if I'm looking at this. Yeah, December 15th of 2013. And the company, like I said, started off as a affordable option. So they started off with the original OnePlus, then they went into the OnePlus 2, and then before they made the 3, they made the X, but the X isn't really that popular. But then they went into the 3 eventually. And then obviously they skipped 4 because 4 in the letter 4 or number 4
it represents death.
Yeah, in China. So they kind of had to skip 4 because
it's like the 13th floor on a hotel. They skipped number 4.
Yeah, pretty much. They just skipped it. So they went to 5, and obviously I remember during the band camp I was at with Ryan, we actually were there. We actually I got to see the launch of the OnePlus 5, and it was really interesting. Those were obviously some of my favorites, and one of my friends actually ended up buying the 5T because in comparison, it was definitely better than the 5, the normal 5. And then we went to the 6, and now we're currently on to the 7. Obviously, right now, the 6T is currently the most popular out of all of them because, well, it's currently had the most special editions in comparison besides the 6. The 6... Well, the 5 had a lot of special editions. They had a Stormtrooper special edition that was really nice. They
had the limited edition Avengers.
Yeah, for the
one.
6.
That was really nice.
That was awesome.
Carbon fiber and gold.
It was, and then they topped it with the 6T with partnering with McLaren, which that sucker has, I think it was 10 gigabytes of RAM, and it has about, like, base storage is 512 gigabytes.
It was ridiculous.
It's so bonkers in what they did with that phone. And it's made out of carbon fiber, which it actually has real carbon fiber from McLaren. It comes with a little seal from McLaren and everything to confirm it. And surprisingly, it was affordable. It was $600. So I think that's kind of interesting given how OnePlus has grown. Obviously, yes, as they grow in popularity and as their brand continues to grow, yes, they begin charging prices. They have to charge prices that are a lot higher in comparison, or a little bit higher, because you have to, you got to pay for keeping the doors open. Nothing's free in life. So you have to keep paying more and more money every year because parts get more expensive. And if they want to make the phone look nicer, which was something OnePlus struggled originally, is the phones didn't look as nice, to get them to the point where now they look just as good as Samsung's and iPhones and things like that, we had to get to that point. And obviously, yes, I do agree with many people. I think that this is where they should stop when it comes to increasing the prices, especially because the fact that, we're already pushing at $600, and a lot of people already don't feel that comfortable pushing to $600 for the phones. especially since obviously they don't have water resistance like all the other flagship phones, and that's, for some people, that's a drawback. Obviously the cameras, for some people, especially if it's competing with the Pixels, you can spend $30 more and get wireless charging, a better camera, and obviously you get, specifically water resistance, better camera, and probably, I'd say, better file management, depending if you want to make that argument with the Google Drive and everything and how it's clean and everything, because that's why I can rock a 64 gigabyte Pixel 2 and not have to worry about my storage running out, because the Google Drive just cleans it up for me and just puts all my photos immediately, and I get unlimited storage for photos. But you start to see that the growth is really great, and it's been exponential every year, because now their brand is overall one of the biggest and popular commodities in the US, because I think it's getting out of the enthusiast brand and now it's going into an actual competitor with them.
It's kind of more mainstream, especially in the US.
Especially we were going to get to that point that, in the US, they're already the first Chinese company to actually sell phones with carriers in the US. So just to provide an example, Huawei is a really big competitor for Samsung and all other Android OEMs in the US, because, well, they obviously make some really high-end phones and everything, and they're really nice and really innovative and unique. The only problem is you can't buy them in the US because, well, they're limited because of the Chinese ban and everything, and connections that Huawei may have with the Chinese government and backdooring and things. So obviously the US doesn't want stuff like that, because they don't want the Chinese government spying on us and things like that. But the fact that they trust OnePlus is interesting, because, like I said, OnePlus isn't shy of their own little dirt, because they got caught one time with providing backdoors, not to the Chinese government, but it was in the sense of collecting data, and they since resolved that, and they said that that was a freak accident and things like that, and they took a big hit to their PR, and obviously they vowed never to do it again, which they're currently not doing it anymore, because they cleaned up their act. That was probably just a bad thing that happened. And it's interesting when you look at it, because the fact that they are the first they're the first Chinese phone that is allowed to be carried in the US, and it's sold by T-Mobile, because they partner with T-Mobile to sell it, but now it has all the bands, the CDM, and I forgot what the other one is, besides CDM, and another one, to have all the bands that support Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, and AT&T. The fact that now they support all of them is kind of interesting, because, well, yeah, a lot of people, they like having options to use their phone wherever they go. So, because most people don't usually stick with the same carrier, sometimes they switch. I know a lot of people are, switching to T-Mobile nowadays, because they're really popular and really consumer, and they're really generous to their customers and everything. And obviously Verizon, I will admit, Verizon probably is the better service overall, but they're not as nice, and I agree that, in my opinion, they're kind of scummy at times. I'd say AT&T is still probably scummier, but because AT&T, don't get me started with them. We'll talk about them later, but
go team.
I don't want to talk about them, because they get my blood boiling. But in the sense that it's interesting, because now what's next for the company? Are they going to end up partnering with all the other carriers to get their phones sold through them, or I don't know, what do you think? So
one of the big things that, well, not really big, but one of the nice little features that OnePlus seems to continue to provide is a double SIM card slot. So you can have two different carriers at the same time, and you can have your Verizon one for unlimited data, and your Sprint one, or something like that. So it does actually provide a lot easier way to kind of go back and forth, and you can kind of drop one and keep the other, and you can pick up one but keep the one that you still have, that kind of stuff, which is really quite useful, especially in the enthusiasts area, where people are switching and finding the best price at this point and the best price at this point.
That's why I said it's interesting, even from a business person's perspective. Most people tend to have a phone for when they're at work, and a phone for when they're at personal time. So the fact that you have the option of having different numbers available on your phone, and decide which one you want to use. So you can use, say, a Verizon card for your work calls, and then say T-Mobile for your personal ones. And so obviously you can switch in between and decide if you want to receive calls from the other one or not at this time, or if you don't, then it makes it a lot easier in comparison. So that's why I said having that dual SIM feature is very unique, especially for Asian, or phones that are made in the Asian market specifically, or because I'm not going to say Chinese, because all other other companies make it, because obviously Samsung is from South Korea, so obviously that's Asian. But it's a very popular thing. Obviously, yes, some people prefer it to be an SD card slot, so a micro SD, so they can have expandable memory, like Samsung, which currently are the only ones that do it besides LG. But obviously LG's falling off in popularity a lot now because, well, they're just not really keeping up with the times and making their phones competitive like Samsung is, which are making huge jumps in being competitive. And besides obviously the Pixels, which don't really sell that well, but they're still very popular for their cameras. But that's aside from the point. When you add OnePlus to the equation, it kind of becomes a little bit more interesting in the sense that, now you're presenting another option. And, consumers like that, is they like having options. Like, they don't want to be condemned to only just Samsung or Apple. Like, people always like having options. And I think that's overall better for the market, especially if you're having a phone that's priced in very less. Like, we're talking like $400 to $500 less than the competition. A lot of people are going to start thinking, because I mentioned this before when I mentioned talking about buying phones in the tech advice episode, that I mentioned that good phones are getting cheap and cheaper phones are becoming good. That was a quote from Marquez that he said, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, because it is true. Like, OnePlus overall as a brand has become, in terms of performance, overall better than most of the flagship phones. Obviously, yes, there are some categories where it lacks, like, not having dual speakers and water resistance, wireless charging, but they make up for it in special ways, like obviously clean software, better specs, obviously, than all the other phones. And then what else? Besides Apple, obviously, because their chipsets are ridiculous. And I agree, like, Apple, I wouldn't be surprised if they start selling the MacBooks and with basically their own custom silicon, which I would not be surprised if they start doing it. But the fact that OnePlus is now providing more for less to the competition, because the competition keeps raising their prices, it becomes a little bit more interesting, especially for the US market, because they're already number one. OnePlus is number one in India right now, which is pretty big as is, because the fact that India is a population of 1.3 billion, that's the fact that they're the number one phone seller in...
It's a pretty large market that they're taking over.
And then, heck, even in China, they're already number 3. They beat out Apple for number 3 spots. Samsung is obviously number 1 and Huawei is number 2. But the fact that they were able to beat Apple in China, and maybe that's also attributing to some of the trade bans that are going on in China and America right now. So there's clearly like some things going on, but I do agree with the company's growth and how they're doing. And obviously, yeah, they're impacting the US market because now they're becoming more popular. The fact that now they're in one of the big 4 carriers of the US, obviously I think it's about to be a big 3 because Sprint and T-Mobile are about to merge. But the fact that we're going in that direction is already interesting as is. So really, I just want to ask you this question too, Ryan, is, what do you think the possible future of the company holds?
Well, so OnePlus has always been, their whole shtick has been, they're the flagship killers. Mm-hmm. So with this growth, they've started to raise prices a little bit, but one thing to keep in mind is so is the competitors that they're trying to beat out. Mm. You have people like Apple that's going from $800 a phone, $900 a phone, $1,000 of a phone.
Basically, the starting price of every iPhone nowadays, besides the iPhone R, is $1,000. And obviously, Samsung, with the release of the S10 and S10 Plus and S10e, obviously the E is $750 because it's meant to kill the iPhone XR. But obviously, the other ones are still priced at $900, and then the 10 Plus is starting at $1,000. But obviously, you get a lot. But still, it's like we're pushing into $1,000 smartphones are becoming the normal. And then you got the Galaxy Fold, which is starting at $2,000. And then you got the Huawei Mate X, which is the Huawei's foldable. It starts at $2,600. So
you get the Razer phone.
Yeah, we're going into some crazy prices. But my opinion is, like, how do you specifically view it as even in your own opinion, Ryan, as a person that owns OnePlus, and I don't know what your foreseeable future is in sticking with them?
Well, if they keep on keeping it where they're like raising their prices by increments of like $20-$50 every model, I think that the growth is going to be pretty great over time in the US, because they've already taken India. They're up there on the board with China, as we've covered, and so I really think that in the US, especially once they've started with one carrier, I think that's going to kind of infect the other carriers, and they're going to start working with other US carriers to get their phone out there. They've started opening. It's not a store; it's a distribution center. They've started opening distribution centers in the U.S. For instance, didn't know that. Yeah. So, for instance, my 3T, when I got it, I had to wait for it to get shipped overseas from China. for the 6 and up, I think. I'm not sure when they had them, but they started making U.S. distribution centers. And now, of course,
I think it was a 5 or 5T.
Yeah, and so that really sped up the process of getting the phones to your customers. They don't have to deal with waiting, because that sometimes can be a big deal when it comes to purchasing a new phone. And now they're in stores. They're in Verizon stores? T-Mobile stores are now popping up, and so I think that's gonna explode. I personally have already sold one of my friends into getting a 6T, and he's loved every bit of it.
Who was it?
Riley.
Really?
Yeah.
Riley, we know.
Yeah.
The one that bought the 5T.
Yeah.
Oh, is it because he broke the 5T?
I don't think so.
I hope he did. I know he broke his other one before getting the 5T, but yeah, I think he did, didn't he?
There's a very good chance that he did.
Probably knowing him. But like I said, specifically my opinion with the 6T, it's going to be interesting to see how the company expands going from the 6T, because obviously, yes, it is a change in form, because they did get rid of the headphone jack, and they were one of the ones that were considered roasting Apple about for removing it, but now they did it too.
Yeah.
But I do admit that they are doing some things interesting, even though, yes, that they removed the LED light. Obviously, a lot of people hate that because they really liked it, but
it's really quite useful for notifications.
I get why they had to, because if you look at the screen, it has a teardrop notch, and it just doesn't have room to put it because it just takes up screen real estate. And I get why they did it. Obviously, the headphone jack, I still debate them on that, especially given that the fingerprint sensor in the screen, it's not the one that's like in the S10, which is actually, it's meant to work even if your hand has stuff on it. Like this one is just, it basically flashes a light on your thumb and scans it, or whatever finger you put. But it is faster, but it's just not as secure.
Well, yeah, keep in mind that OnePlus has some of the fastest fingerprint scanners on the market, and they're pretty dang accurate too.
Yeah, they're stupidly accurate, which is really good. And that's why I said, like, a lot of the competition had to catch up. That they really had to, because the phones were just ridiculous in their fingerprint sensors, and I love them. That I just do agree that when they go with the in-screen one, it definitely is not as fast as actually having the scanner there, but I will admit that it is a good push in the right direction, because that's what people want. They want the market to go in that direction, because people want more screen real estate. Obviously, Samsung took a very unique approach and got rid of the notch and basically put a 3D cut hole into the actual display, which is kind of interesting, especially because I remember I was seeing how somebody was discussing like the philosophy and behind it, which was kind of interesting. It's almost like you don't really notice it. Like your brain naturally just puts what's missing in there, so you don't really notice it. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about it that way, which I wouldn't be surprised if OnePlus goes in that direction. Even though I do agree the teardrop notch was perfectly fine on the 6T, was amazing. I think it's just mainly people want dual front-facing speakers on it, because, you know, we're getting so accustomed to that. Like iPhones have really good speakers. The Google Pixels have 2 front-facing speakers as well, because they started that on the 2, which that's why I like using it for media consumption. And obviously the 3, even though I don't agree with the 3's design language, I still agree that its speakers were second to none. And then Samsung really stepped up their game without having to need to put an actual dedicated speaker. They use the earpiece as a speaker itself, which is really nice. And I just think overall in the direction we're going in, it's going to be interesting to see how this company turns out, especially now that they're building a following in the US, and they're growing it even more and more every year. And their conventions, when they hold their events for the reveals, are getting a lot of attention. Like a lot of news stations are reporting on it, and then you have all the big YouTubers going to the events and then reporting on them, getting the hands on. And since the company is stepping up their game and how they're presenting everything, you can just tell by looking at it, they're not afraid to be themselves. And I think it's kind of interesting, because I like the Samsung CEO. I think he's funny, but like comparing it to Tim Cook and all of them, I can just tell they're just so nervous. And obviously, a lot of us in the crowd, I've never been to those events, but it'd be pretty funny to go. I think it's just interesting how you just see how the crowd reacts to a lot of the Apple stuff, where they're just like most of the time quiet, and then they clap. And then if you went to the Google 3 event, oh boy, the Pixel 3 event was just so bad. Like people were just like, great, the phone is the way we thought it was going to be, because we already got it leaked in advance. But even then, heck, I even think OnePlus has a decent track record when it comes to leaking phones. I don't think they're, at least I think, pretty good track records at least, but we already have a good idea of what the phones will be like spec wise, because obviously we know that they're going to have new Snapdragons, a fully clocked version, a lot of RAM, battery size depending. I don't know where they'll go from the 6T. Are they just going to make every OnePlus after that have the same battery and then eventually bump up to 4,000? Which, if they bump up to 4,000 with the software, I honestly believe the phone, you literally wouldn't be able to kill it in a day unless if you're intentionally doing something stupid. And
power in half an hour.
I think even then, like, it's kind of ironic because they don't really consume that much power, and I think a benefit to them is the fact that the displays are only capped at 1080, and it's a really good 1080 AMOLED. Obviously, yeah, a lot of people really want 1440p and higher than that, like the Samsung ones, but I think you don't really need higher than that. 1080p is perfectly fine, and it watches everything. It's 1080 when you watch on YouTube. 1080 60 is really easy to watch. Obviously, yes, the Snapdragons can record up to 4K 60 because, you know, that's what the Snapdragon chips are good at. They can handle 4K 60. And obviously, really, the only place I can see the OnePlus improving is really just the camera, and probably considering adding a water resistance water resistance or wireless charging. I think, even though, yes, I believe that getting the certification will raise the price a good amount, I still believe that a lot of people will like that, or even wireless charging. But even then, the dash charging, which I was surprised Ryan didn't mention that, the dash charging, obviously, yes, it is definitely one of the fastest charging methods on the planet right now on a smartphone. Clearly, it is. It charges up the phone, I think, 0 to 80 in less than, I think it was 30 minutes or something.
Yeah, before I got here, my phone was on 30, and I charged it at home for about 15, and I was at 80.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's ridiculous. And then obviously with the McLaren, they made the warp charging, which is even faster. So that's, I'm just like, I don't know what they'll do with that. If it's only going to be for the McLaren edition, which I don't know what they'll do. Obviously it's sold out because obviously it was a limited edition item and people liked it. Yeah. And that's usually how OnePlus operates, is always they release a good certain, like, 3 colors up front, and then they release the rest down the line. Some people usually are like, I'll wait till the next color, because they made some really interesting colors with the 6 line. Obviously they introduced a really beautiful red, because now the back is made out of glass, so it looks beautiful. They introduced the white looks a lot better, and black looks really good. And then they also introduced the Thunder Purple. And then obviously you get the special editions, which they change up every year. Like the 5T was the Stormtrooper and Darth Vader one, and then with the 6 they had the Avengers one, and then with the 6T was the McLaren. So I don't know who they'll partner with next. I wouldn't be surprised if they did something with Avengers Endgame, especially because they did it with the 6, so who knows, they might do it. But I honestly, in my opinion, it's going to be interesting to see where this company goes, because I really do like them. I always recommend them to friends and family that are interested in new phones. If they don't want to break their wallets and they just want a really good phone for good value and everything. And obviously, yes, software updates, you don't really have to worry about it since they're part of Google's. They give you software updates up to 3 years. Obviously, some people say iPhones give you up to 5 years, but keep in mind that iPhones, even though, yes, it gets, the 5S has, iOS 12, that doesn't mean that it's going to run good. Obviously, yes, I agree with my roommate, as he says that iPhones, naturally, the batteries suck just so they can make you replace them or just upgrade a new phone, because they deteriorate fairly quickly compared to other phones. And I think eventually, until we get to the point that we figure out how to make better batteries for phones, we're going to be stuck in this cycle of upgrading probably every 2 years, I think.
I'm in year 3. I haven't had any issues.
That's what I'm saying. But it's interesting, because it's the same thing with people that say about cars. Like old cars, there's a reason people like old cars and they hold on to them, because they were made better quality compared to other ones, or current cars, really. But yeah, that's pretty much all we got for you guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode, especially because, there was a lot more planning that went into it, obviously, and then obviously a new setup and everything, and seeing how the equipment sounds and all this. But obviously the scheduling issues that led to us having to record this on a Saturday instead. Obviously, yeah. Sorry, Ryan. It's all right.
That's all good.
But yeah, I hope you guys overall enjoyed. I hope you overall, I don't know, that'd be pretty weird if you guys enjoyed the episode I posted on Tuesday, or really Wednesday, for the asking my girlfriend to prom. I know that was a really unique way of doing it, because I was going to do it on this episode, really. But it's overall, it doesn't really matter.
Didn't want to take away my thunder.
Yeah. She said yes anyway, so that's the good thing. But yeah, that's real I got for you guys. I know that next week we're going to go back to our regularly scheduled programming, obviously going back to every episode on Wednesday. But like I said, I told you guys earlier when we adjusted the schedule that, you know, eventually from some time to time we would upload a special episode from during the weekend usually, but that's really all I got for you guys. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, bro. So yeah, until next time, guys. I love you guys. You guys take care of yourselves. Take care. Bye.